Hey everyone, welcome to another special edition of the Digital Debate Center. Today we're going to be talking about the Cyber Affirmative that will be released for the middle school varsity division. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So to briefly remind ourselves what the different parts of an affirmative are, we have inherency, which is what's happening now. We have solvency, which is how the plan solves the harms of the status quo. We have an advantage, which is kind of a benefit to the plan. And then we have the plan text, which is what the plan does. So let's go ahead and start off with the plan text. So the plan text read, the United States federal government should increase its security commitment under Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to include responding to cyber attacks and information warfare. So that's a lot. So we can go ahead and pick out a couple different things, though. We're increasing our security commitment. A commitment is a promise. Who are we making the promise to? Well, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is a security alliance between the United States and some other European countries and some other North American countries. And then what is the particular promise? Well, we're making a promise under Article 5. Article 5 is the keystone, the foundation of NATO. And it says that if there's an attack by an attack on one NATO member state, under the idea of collective defense, NATO will treat that as a collective attack on everyone. So an attack on one is an attack on all. That means generally you don't want to attack NATO because you don't want to go to war with 20 some odd countries. So let's talk about inherency, which is what's happening right now. The Friedenborg evidence says that right now, NATO lacks clear cyber red lines. Failure to include cyber warfare under Article 5 makes Russian cyber attacks inevitable. And this gets back to that promise that I said that NATO was making. Currently, Article 5 says that if there's an armed attack upon a NATO country, NATO will respond and treat it as an attack on all, justifying armed self-defense. The problem here is that the Friedenborg evidence says that idea hasn't been updated since when it was created after World War II. So it doesn't include cyber attacks. So Russia, while it's afraid to maybe send tanks into Germany, is not afraid at all to cyber attack NATO countries because it's not afraid of collective self-defense because cyber attacks do not apply to Article 5. So this piece of evidence says that during the Cold War, Russia was very scared of Article 5. They didn't want to attack NATO. But because Article 5 doesn't include cyber warfare, which is what the plan changes, it's led to massive Russian cyber attacks. Contention 2 is solvency. The second piece of Friedenborg evidence says that expanding Article 5 will deter Russia, that we need to project strength to solve cyber attacks. This piece of evidence says that expanding Article 5 is necessary because right now there is lawlessness, there are no rules, and as a result, Russia is taking advantage in cyber attacking. This piece of evidence says we need clear and severe consequences in order to deter Russia. Article 5 provides both because we create a clear red line. A red line is something that you can't cross without consequences. And the consequence is severe because invoking Article 5 would lead to the possibility of armed attacks against Russia by NATO countries. So NATO will deter aggression. We have two advantages here. Remember, an advantage is a benefit of the plan. The Pearson and Landy evidence starts off our Russia advantage by saying that Russia is acting very aggressively in the status quo. And in fact, Russia has put its nuclear weapons on high alert. That means that it's very dangerous that we're in a gray area where we haven't made the rules of the road clear to Russia, because any sort of conflict could go nuclear. The second argument says that Russia is playing with fire. And in particular, it says that there's no clearly well understood or well agreed upon definition of what the red line is in regards to cyber attack. It's just kind of supposed that if there were a sufficiently big cyber attack, that NATO could invoke Article 5. That means that hackers are getting closer and closer to crossing the red line because they don't know where it is. That could lead to what's called miscalculation, where Russia thinks that doing something, hacking a hospital or hacking a bank, for example, won't lead to war between NATO and Russia. But instead, NATO thinks they've crossed the red line, which is not clear where that red line is right now. And as a result, there's war. The third argument is the impact, and it says that Russian cyber war escalates. And it basically says without rules of the road, without a cyber red line, the Healy evidence says that Russian offensive cyber operations might get sufficiently great that the US would retaliate against Russia, and then we would have tit-for-tat escalation that would slowly lead to conflict and potentially nuclear war. So in particular, Putin thinks that cyber attacks are a low-cost, high-benefit strategic tool, right? Because it costs very little to invest in cyber attacks and they get a pretty big strategic gain. The problem with that is it turns out the cost might be really big because the United States might decide that something has crossed a red line, and as a result, NATO would get involved. So Russia Advantage just says Russia doesn't know where the red line is, and so they're incentivized to cross it potentially and lead to miscalculation. Our second advantage is democracy. And in the plan text, it said that Article 5 would now cover cyber attacks, which is the first advantage, and information warfare, which is the second advantage. You probably heard a lot in the news or just heard people talk about Russian hacking the 2016 election. The Hunt evidence says that Russia is using cyber attacks to try to influence elections globally, because if it can control which leaders are elected, then it can get leaders that are beneficial or less democratic. This evidence also says that for having free and fair elections is the cornerstone of democracy. And if Russia is able to change the legitimacy of those, then democracy would decline globally. The second piece of evidence is a very clear impact. The Diamond evidence says that authoritarian regimes are aggressive, they push anti-democratic values. As a result, if there's more authoritarianism, the world will be more hostile. As a result, the United States needs to combat authoritarian aggression by countries like Russia by doing the plan. So I think that's pretty clear. The Cyber Affirmative says that currently Article 5 of NATO does not include cyber attacks and information warfare. Article 5 is though an attack on one is an attack on all. It's collective self-defense. The plan creates rules of the road and says, hey, here's where the red line is, so that Russia won't respond or won't cross the red line and will stop cyber attacking us due to the threat of armed conflict. And also it will stop hacking elections, which is critical to sustain our very way of government, democracy. Hope everyone understood that. If you have any questions, feel free to contact the Atlanta Urban Debate League. We'd be happy to answer them. Hope to see y'all at the tournament soon.